In this podcast, I sat down with Madhu Sudan Gautam, a freelance consultant working on disaster risk reduction in Nepal. I hope you enjoy this interview as much as I did. Hi.
Hi.
So nice to meet you. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. So the goal of this podcast is to learn about your experiences in the field of climate and development, and to glean some insight into your thoughts on the future of climate change and development, particularly in the context of Nepal. So before we begin, I'll just introduce myself quickly. My name is Erin Lin, and I am a current graduate student at McGill University, studying sociology and development. I also currently work for the Canadian government in climate finance. So the climate development nexus is a burgeoning interest of mine. So maybe to begin, could you maybe introduce yourself and provide a brief overview of your experience working in climate and development?
Yes, thank you, Erin. Well, my name is Madhu Sudan Gautam. I am located in Kathmandu, Nepal. My background is economics, and by profession, I'm working in climate change and disaster risk reduction issues in Nepal. So basically, I'm an educator and a freelance consultant, working with the government of Nepal, NGOs, NGOs, development partners, and been working with the various level of government. So by speaking specifically in the context of Nepal, so we have 3 layers of government: local level, provincial level, and the federal level government. So I have been working with different level of government, supporting them in climate change and disaster risk reduction issues, and helping them mainstreaming in annual and periodic plan at various levels.
Great, thank you. So I noticed that you have worked for a wide range of organizations and institutions, from the World Bank to the UNDP, to Oxfam, to organizations within Nepal, and for the Nepalese government. I'm wondering, in your opinion, how do the institutions at the international level differ from institutions in Nepal in the way that they understand and implement projects related to climate and development?
Yeah. So basically, the institutions, international institutions working in Nepal, basically they are required to collaborate with the government. So there is a provision: without collaboration with the government, they are not allowed to work in any development agendas, whether it is climate change or any other disaster-related issues. Whether INGOs, development partners, like bilateral organizations, multilateral organizations, they have to follow the priority of the government, policy of the government. So the government has periodic plans, annual plans. So they have to, it has to be harmonized with the government, plans. Whether it is a federal government, provincial government, or the local government. Local government have their own plans, policies, plans, and priorities, right? So provincial government also have their own plans, and the federal government also has their own plans, priorities. So if any development agency wants to work in Nepal, they have to harmonize with the priority of the government, the policy of the government. So, but there are different modalities, while working with the government. But basically, they have to support the existing policy of the government. So they are not allowed to work independently. So somehow they have to prove that if they are working the climate change and disaster-related issues, then it should be the priority of the particular, the government agency, right? So this is how the work of development agencies in collaboration of the government goes.
How would you say that impacts the provision of development programs in Nepal compared to maybe countries and regions where they don't have specific mandates on collaboration with the government?
Yeah, but any agencies, whether it is regional agencies or the agencies working in Nepal, they should get mandate first from the authentic government agency in Nepal. They have to take the mandate of working within Nepal, particularly in the Ministry of Finance. So they have to go through the channel of Ministry of Finance, and we have a Social Welfare Council through these agencies, they have to take the mandate and that they are allowed to work in Nepal in their, the areas of expertise, and then they can work. So they have to prove, first of all, to the government, propose their expertise and the proposal. Then it has to be approved by the concerned ministry or the other agencies. Then they are allowed to work.
Mm-hmm. As a development expert, how do you interpret this relationship between government and organization? Do you think that this benefits like development programs and implementation of Nepal, or does it hinder it?
Yeah, this is an important question, I think. So if we see the support of, development partners, the NGOs working in Nepal, so their coverage is limited, right? So regarding climate change and disaster risk reduction in Nepal is the priority of the government. So we have, the government has already, provisioned the policies, required policies, laws, strategies, plans, programs, and climate actions have been reflected in sectoral laws and periodic annual plans, right? So the thing is that the government has the limited capacity. In terms of policy provision, Nepal is in a good position. But in terms of financing climate action, the government has a limitation in provisioning the climate finance at local level, provincial level, and the federal level. When it comes to about development support from the development agencies, the support is limited. It is location specific. It is not the country wide, right? So a project has certain life and it has certain location. It is location specific. So the requirement, the action, the climate action is not sufficient in terms of the support that the Nepal is getting from development partners, and the government is unable to take it nationwide in terms of understanding climate, right, and planning, governing, allocating resources, right. So at that level, we need a lot of capacity building issues, financing issues. These things are we have in Nepal.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned the capacity building and lack of resources are large issues for climate finance in Nepal. Can you maybe provide some insight into other climate issues that Nepal is currently facing, either on the environmental side or policy side?
Yeah, so in policy side, we are good, but there is a kind of broader policy. Nepal has adopted broader policy on climate action, but it has not been well integrated, well linked with the sectoral policies. When you are talking about agriculture policy, education policy, environment policy, and other infrastructure-related policies, so it is not well reflected in sectoral laws and sectoral policies. We have umbrella policy of the climate change, and the Act, we have Environment Protection Act. So it calls for action across the sector, climate action across the sector. But it is not implementable unless and until it is well reflected in sectoral laws and policies. So that is what we are currently lacking. We are good at agricultural policy and environment policies, but in other sectors, infrastructure development, education, and agriculture, we are good at agriculture, but in other sectors, the climate action is not well integrated. And so there is a kind of coordination gap. We have identified urgency of climate action in the policy programs, plans, strategies. It has been reflected well, but the organization level, institutions working for climate action at the government, at federal, provincial, and the local level, So they are not well coordinated.
How do you think that these issues of, lack of coordination, lack of implementation, as a consultant, how do you see any potential solutions to these issues?
Yeah, recently I had an opportunity to work with the World Bank assignment and supporting the government of Nepal. So we felt the need and urgency of integrating climate action in different sectors and updating the existing, the Environment Protection Act, where we have the provision of climate action. So the existing law, Environment Protection Act, has not spelled out adequately about the coordination with the provincial level government and the local level government. Local level government in Nepal are the key agencies, government agencies, to implement climate action because they are implementing agencies. Federal government is the policy facilitation. It has a role of policy and planning and facilitation, right? So, but at the implementation level, we have provincial and the local level government. The local level government are the key to implement climate action. So the current law is not sufficient to call or to build the capacity to coordinate with the local level government. So we have this new federal government structure, and we are experiencing the country is experiencing this new system, federal system. And there are a lot of governance issues, but still this climate action is being integrated at different level of government, whether it is a policy, laws, or plans or strategies.
Okay. You've mentioned disaster risk reduction multiple times, and this seems to be a key area of your work. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that and the role of disaster risk reduction in climate change, particularly in relation to resilience and adaptation.
Yeah, so yeah, we have good policy provision in disaster risk reduction, but there is a kind of sometimes kind of duplication between climate actions and disaster risk reduction. So we have different institutions working for climate action, disaster risk reduction. So there is also a need to harmonize between these institutions working disaster risk and climate change, because most of the disasters are climate changes in Nepal, right? So there is a need of kind of harmonization, collaboration, coordination between these institutions. In terms of policy, we have very good policy provisions for disaster risk reductions. Institutions are working mainly in Nepal. If you refer to disaster risk reduction, we are more response oriented, okay, rather preparedness and mitigation approach. So Nepal has to do a lot in terms of building resilience of our resilience of the communities, resilience of our infrastructures, right? Resilience of different sectors, whether it is education sector, health sector, agriculture sector. So there is a need, and some programs are going on to build the resilience of the communities, resilience of the institutions supporting in disaster risk reduction. But there is a lack of capacity. I mentioned earlier that there is a lack of capacity in understanding disaster risk reduction and governance also. We have set up the governing entities within all level of government. If you talk about the local level government, we have a DRR and climate change related institution in each unit of local level. But there are the committee working for that, right? So, but the problem is understanding DRR and climate change and planning, having a plan for the climate and disaster related. So there is probably policy provisions are there, but the thing is that they don't have a proper understanding of DRR and climate change and planning capacity and integrating that into annual and periodic plan. So the most important question for resilience building is integrating climate and disaster related issues in the annual and periodic plan. That is the major gap that we are currently having. But the efforts are going on, we have 753 local level, and they are required to develop their own, like a local disaster and climate resilience plan, LDCR, we call it LDCR. And most of the local level have already developed it, and they have to update it on annual basis, right? But there are few local level they are yet to develop the LDCRP. So the thing is that the plan are developed, but the plan are not integrated with the annual development programs, periodic development programs. So there is a kind of gap. Plans are in isolation. Climate and DRR plan is there, but it's in isolation. It's not well integrated with the annual program. So this also leads to the financing gap. So once the climate and the DRR issues are identified, the vulnerabilities are identified, then it has to be mainstream to the annual plan. But that is what we have currently lacking, and this also leads to the financing gap in the climate action.
Mm-hmm. So if I'm understanding correctly, you're saying that climate change and disaster risk aren't fully integrated within Nepal, which leads to a lack of quick responses to disaster. Nepal typically has more response-oriented disaster risk programs, but not enough programs to increase resilience to disasters. Is that correct?
That's true.
So you mentioned these vulnerabilities within Nepal. For those who are not familiar with the specific environmental consequences of climate change that Nepal is facing, could you maybe list a couple of the most prominent threats in Nepal?
Yeah, very, very extreme, livelihood threats in Nepal. So every year we are having, the flash flood, landslides, right? So this is leading to the loss of lives and the livelihoods of the people. So majority of the livelihood is coming from agriculture. So agricultural fields and the crops are being damaged every year. So due to floods and the landslides. So this seriously, brings the threat to the livelihood of the communities in Nepal. So building a resilience of climate-related, the risks is key and urgent need of the government, and the government has the priority of building resilience. But the thing is that the capacity, technology, and then the resource gap that is what we are currently having.
Mm-hmm. So in climate circles, the idea of who is globally responsible for paying for loss and damages and the financial, economic, social consequences of disasters. What is your opinion on who should pay for all of this?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, globally, so the countries and the players have agreed that the industrial countries and the developed countries are responsible for carbon emission and the climate change, right? So if you refer to Nepal has a negligible contribution of GHG emission, and but Nepal is highly vulnerable to climate change. Our Himalayas are melting, right? So, and people are losing their lives, property in Himalayas, hills, and in dry areas. We are having a flood, and climate being more unpredictable to the government and agencies working, and it is being more challenging to reduce the risks from disasters. So, if you see the data of loss and damage in case of Nepal, it is increasing year by year. So definitely the global leaders and developed countries have to come forward. They agreed in the Paris Agreement and support the developing country like Nepal to finance the loss and damage.
Mm-hmm. Kind of shifting a little bit, development practice is often criticized for its lack of accountability in practice. Since you have worked as an independent consultant, kind of in the broad realm of evaluation, what are, in your opinion, some best practices in development work that can ensure credibility, particularly looking forward into the future of climate and development?
Yeah, this is a very, key, aspect of, evaluation is, accountability is a challenge in a country like Nepal. Accountability instruments, in my opinion, accountability instruments are not well institutionalized in case of Nepal. Like development projects supported by bilateral agencies and other multilateral agencies like World Bank. In my opinion, so evaluation is the important aspect, but it is not well institutionalized. And when it comes to the national level, if you look at the national level, this bringing accountability to development intervention is the responsibility of the government. Mm-hmm. And it has to be institutionalized. The instrument of accountability should be institutionalized. From the legislative, body, they are required to have monitoring and evaluation of the development intervention. But this has not been institutionalized. When I look at the Nepal's case, legislative bodies, there is a, committee in legislative body. They are responsible to make laws, but they are, at the same time, they are also responsible to monitor and evaluate the existing policies, programs. So we develop the policies, we develop law, but there is no evaluation of such laws and policies. There is no evaluation of the existing plan. There is no evaluation of the strategy. We make a strategy, but there is no evaluation, proper mechanism. The strong instrument for that is not in place. So that leads to compromise the accountability of our, intervention. So that is one, aspect. And judicial level also, we have auditing institutions. So when I was working with the World Bank, supporting the government, so we have an audit institution. Audit institution has not conducted any audit of the climate policy and climate related, expenditure. We can say there is a gap in making accountable to the institution working in climate action. So this is what in the government level, state level. So our instruments are not so strong and regular, using those instruments. And at the project level also, mm-hmm. the accountability issue is not so strong. There is a mechanism, but it is not so strong in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So we need to work further to make accountability of development intervention so that we can have an impact, efficiency, effectiveness, and sustainability for intervention.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that there must, at the government level, it must be mandated for there to be specific mechanisms and instruments used to ensure accountability. What types of mechanisms and instruments, maybe some examples, that would be most effective if they were to be mandated?
Yeah. For example, we have a National Planning Commission. National Planning Commission is responsible mm-hmm. to evaluate the, development works by the government, different ministries, implemented by different ministries. But the Planning Commission is when I see the existing instrument to monitor and evaluate the intervention of the government, it is not so strong. It is not so binding, right? So it's just for the sake of having monitoring and evaluation. It is not kind of linked to the feedback mechanism. So there is a gap. Due to this gap, it cannot help the government to be accountable for its, work. So that's where I can see one, the gap of accountability. And in the legislative body also, I mentioned that there is a body to oversee monitoring and evaluation, but this body is not supported by the expert. So they are the people's representative, right? People's representative can't have, technical kind of evaluation and provide, feedback, specific feedback mechanism and hold the government accountable. So they have to be supported, provided with the experts in the relevant field. So we have provision of all this, holding the government accountable, but they are not strong enough. So we need to reevaluate our existing evaluation mechanism and further work on that so that we can hold the government accountable.
So the mechanisms and the instruments are there, but they just need to be strengthened, right? That's it.
Strengthened, yes.
Okay, so I think we're nearing about the end of the questions that I prepared for you. But I was just wondering if, in general, maybe as a last question, how do you kind of envision the future of, development and climate change as, a field? And moving forward, what do you think, what do you think are the necessary steps for Nepal and around the world to ensure that we, actually tackle climate change?
Yeah, Nepal is, I think, moving towards the right direction. But whatever, the steps and initiatives have been taken, they are not sufficient. And the urgency of climate action is increasing day by day, right? The government, the ministries and development partners, they are feeling the urgency of climate action and strengthening the existing, intervention and allocating more resources for climate action and integrating that into the regular development intervention. So it has been very, felt, the necessity of this has been felt by all the stakeholders. And I see that the future of climate action is good in Nepal, but we need a lot of, investment and resources. So that is what we are currently lacking. But our institutions are not good to access the financing resources from, sources from international, partners. So that's what we are currently lacking. But I hope that we are in a good direction and we will be able to reduce personal damage due to, climate-related, disaster in Nepal.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's great. It's been really interesting to learn about the case of Nepal. So that reaches the end of my questions. As we wrap up the interview, do you have any other thoughts you'd like to share or anything you'd like to add?
Thank you for this, interview and asking about climate action in Nepal. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. It's been a pleasure learning about your experiences in the field. I hope you have a good day.
Yeah, thank you.
Right, bye, thank you.
Yeah.